share my screen now?
I'm going to just introduce you, and then I'll turn the floor over to you. And we're really grateful that you're with us today. So Boedi Widjaja was born in Indonesia and now lives in Singapore. He's trained as an architect and a graphic designer, and his art takes up themes of house, home, and homeland, often drawing on his own experiences. He works across methods from drawing, photography, and architectural installations to bio and live art. I'm interested in understanding more what you mean by that. And he received the inaugural Quagoma and Singapore Art Museum co-commission for his Black Hut series, which was shown at the 9th Asia Pacific Triennial and the 6th Singapore Biennial. And his works have also been shown in numerous international shows in New York and Venice, Yinchuan, London, and Singapore. So in your artist statement, Boedi writes, "My art is deeply tied to diasporic notions of place, identity, and belonging. They're autobiographical and oblique, drawing much from my childhood migration from Indonesia to Singapore. They explore the entanglement between memory, history, and myths through photography, video, architectural installations, bio art, and live art." So today, Boedi will talk with us about several of his ongoing interdisciplinary projects that he's working on in parallel. So several threads developing at the same time. One of these is a tree plus, a series that explores. Coffee, I think you might have your. Let me see if I can mute everyone. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Mute. Okay. There we go.
Okay.
It won't let me do that. Okay, Boedi's not muted. Okay, so just let me finish. At the core of Tree++, he writes, is a hybrid DNA that he synthesized together with a geneticist, a chimeric genetic code made up of his Y chromosomes, the chloroplast from a tree that his paternal grandfather was named after, and a genetically encoded text that tells of his migration stories. So based in multicultural Singapore, amidst Southeast Asia's diversity of peoples and languages, he's particularly interested in the visual and semiotic intersection between words and images, where symbols and signs sometimes blur to birth new hybrid meanings that root him deeper and draw him closer to the place that he imagines home, house, and homeland to be. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we're really looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Peggy. Can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to this session towards learning together. And before I begin, I would like to thank Qian for the invitation, Peggy for facilitating, and the Global D Center for having me here. There are two major transitions in my life that had significantly impacted my art making. The first, crossing disciplines. I was formally trained in architecture, crossed to the design industry after I graduated, co-founded a firm that designed in print, web, and space for corporate clients located in different parts of the world and of different cultures. In my mid-30s, I turned to art practice full-time. And the second, my childhood migration. I was born in a small town of Solo City in central Java, Indonesia, and moved to Singapore together with my elder sister when I was 9 in 1984. My parents painted a picture that studying overseas was good and suggested that we give it a try. And only much later did I come across text like this. The year 1985 will be remembered as a year of violent incidents jolting Indonesians into soul-searching of a darker sort, and as a year of trials of prominent dissidents. The economic outlook was dampened by recession. The year was marked by two other anniversaries, the 40th year since the proclamation of independence and the 20th year of the New Order government. A spate of violence brought to an end a decade of calm and tranquility. My father was unable to find a job in Singapore, and we didn't have relatives here. So he turned to the classified ads to cold call landlords who were willing to also become our legal guardians. My sister and I were housed with strangers to live with temporary families. I didn't think that we were problem kids, but somehow we kept changing guardians. House was a fluid concept. Recently, I counted the number of times that I've moved, and I realized that it is 18 times. This navigation bar shows my various series. As you can see, I am not very good at finishing what I've started. At any one time, I will be working on projects across different series. So a quick overview of what each series looks at. Root Words is the oldest series where I explore the notion of a diasporic language, hovering between word and image, sound and meaning, and informed by the intercultural liminality of the migrant experience. Kang-O is a Chinese dialect transliterated to Bahasa Indonesia. It literally means rivers and lakes, or Jianghu in Mandarin. The series inquires into the imagery in wuxia films, a genre popular among the overseas Chinese that I grew up watching in the 1980s through bootleg VHS tapes. Imaginary Homeland looks at the popular imagery of national and cultural identities during the Cold War period from the standpoint of Southeast Asia emerging as new nations. Black Hut explores the psychophysical architectures of dwelling. Its primary gesture is in the act of building site-specific sonic protostructures with efflorescent concrete membranes. For today, I will focus on Path and touch on works from a 3+ and Imaginary Homeland. The series Path looks at migratory notions of belonging, physical movement, and isolation. The artistic outcomes are varied, but almost every project includes live art strategies, art that is made in the presence of, and sometimes with the participation of the audience. Let me start with my most recent Path projects, Path 11, Blindness, and Path 12, River Origin, Lang Tao Sha. They were made in the past 2 years and both engage with the cosmic ray particle muons as material. I learned about muons at the cusp of the pandemic outbreak, in the midst of experiencing an abrupt change of time-space, an acute sense of uncrossable distance and invisible presence at a planetary scale. I read about muons, which was like science fiction to me. These impulses of cosmic longing and the folding of distance and time were explored in my first muon work, Path 12, River Origin, commissioned by BioArt Southeast Asia, Taiwan in 2021. Muons travel at relativistic speed to break through the fabric of time-space. They experience distance that is 70 times shorter and time 70 times slower than us. Hence, despite the half-life of 1.5 microseconds, they are able to reach Earth before decaying. I was strongly drawn to the unimaginable distance that these cosmic travelers cross to reach Earth, the memories they bear, and the stories they tell. They are witnesses to our planetary unfolding, and they come unbearably close, slipping through molecules in my body, as if to impart their deep cosmic origins. And last month, I found out that my imagination was a reality for a group of scientists who look into planetary origins and study muons as material messengers to tell us how life began. My mind was simply blown away. I performed for the camera along the southern coast of Singapore, facing Java, my hometown, and sensed through my body the entry of muons. I held a muon tracker that I had 3D printed, and inside the casing are Geiger counters, gas-filled tubes that detect ionizing radiation like muons and electronic components. When a muon hits, it would trigger light and sound, a Morse code recitation of a verse in Tang Dynasty poem Lang Tao Sha, Waves Dredging Sand. The poem was written when the author Liu Yixi was in exile and began with the story of Zhang Qian's travels to the West. Zhang Qian is a historical figure, a Han Dynasty envoy whose expedition in 138 BC is considered to be the foundation of the first Silk Road. At the same time, he was a mythical or even mystical figure who was commissioned by the emperor to find the source of Yellow River, an origin site of ancient Chinese civilization. His story appears in several literary works and paintings. This is a Qing Dynasty painter. And paraphrasing from its label copy, Zhang Qian was commissioned by the emperor to find the source of the Yellow River. According to the legend, he navigated up the river on a raft and reached the Milky Way, where he met two celestial beings, the herd boy with his buffalo and the weaver maiden. These are the names given to the two stars that appear together in the sky on only one night of the year, on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. A change was observed in their configuration by the court astronomer, who took this as a sign of confirmation that Zhang Qian had found the source of the Yellow River. The opening of the poem Lang Tao Sha, Waves Dredging Sand, recounts this same fantastical story. When we made the video, we were in the midst of COVID-restricted movement in Singapore and could only proceed because of a special provision that allowed for filming activities. The mood was closed up, a little tense, perhaps an appropriate setting for my performance. I saw myself as communing with the muons, viscerally contemplating mythic origins and my own diasporic cosmology. My second muon work, Path 11, Blindness, an experimental photography project that was commissioned by Exactly Foundation earlier than River Origins, took longer to complete. A key industry application for muons is muography. It is similar to X-ray imaging, but with the freely available muons as the radioactive particles. Muography has been used to reveal the hidden chamber of Egypt's Great Pyramid for seismic monitoring through imaging of magma flow in the volcanoes and tsunami waves prediction through observing underwater currents in Japan. The seismic monitoring and tsunami waves prediction projects were pioneered by Professor Hiroyuki Tanaka of the University of Tokyo, who has very generously given his time to my artistic and scientifically primitive research into muons. Before I elaborate on the photographic process for blindness, let me take a detour and share about experimental photography in my practice. I am interested in photographic imaging, where both process and outcome bear traces of the artist's hand. John Berger, in his essay Drawn to the Moment, said, in the 19th century, when social time became unilinear, vectorial, and regularly exchangeable, the instant became the maximum which could be grasped or preserved. I wanted a photography that resists this. Again from Berger, but to misquote him, how does not drawing but photography encompass time? What does it hold in its stillness? Can photography presuppose another view of time? In the Imaginary Homeland series, I looked at political images of Southeast Asia during the Cold War period that had directly and indirectly impacted my national and cultural identities. I used my mobile camera with invert color settings turned on to draw two images simultaneously, a negative graphite image on paper and a positive pixel-based one on the screen. In order to produce satisfactory image on screen, I had to constantly look through the mobile device as I drew. I was relying on the camera lens and the algorithm within the device to show up tonalities that my eye unaided could not otherwise detect. In viewing the drawing, the audience are invited to use their mobile devices to see its positive image. For this work, I turned peci, a velvet headgear commonly worn by men in Indonesia and promoted by the first President Sukarno as a nationalist identity, into pinhole cameras. These are camera obscura prints shown alongside the sculpture of the peci and the camera tripod. Let's now get back to the photographic process for blindness. I wanted something that would reveal the material presence of muons and at the same time be marked by the presence of my hands. I wanted an embodied photographic process. The first step was to blindfold the camera. CMOS image sensors are the electronic eyes embedded in our mobile phone cameras. Measuring about 1 centimeter across, they detect visible light. They are also able to detect ionizing radiation particles like muons. Muons are material and not light waves. Hence, the marks recorded on the CMOS are collisions, not photonic imaging. When the muon strikes the CMOS sensor, the radioactive particle liberates an electric charge to create a pixel signature. This image here is a collection of muons hitting the camera in my studio over a week. Each track is a unique physical contact between the muons and the sensor. Having recorded the raw muonic signals, I went on to photograph each muon track using an analog process that I had devised. It involved my constant manipulation of inverted lenses. These are the photographs of the subatomic muons. I am at the beginning of my research into muons, and there are a lot more that I want to do. I am now working on Part 13 Quaver Ciphers, supported by the Singapore National Arts Council Creation Grant. I am developing it as a virtual reality work, a digital experience that is connected to a physical muon tracker. Detection of muons in the physical room will trigger a change in the VR space for the audience. Quaver Ciphers contemplates the city's splintered private memories and interlaced social networks, close physical proximities, and vast cultural distances. In addition to building on the ideas explored in Blindness and River Origins, the project will look at muons as material messengers that impacted life on Earth. For example, through spallation. It is a nuclear reaction that occurs when high energy particles like muons collide into matter to create an expulsion of protons, neutrons, and alpha particles, and possibly the origin of the elements on Earth. In looking at muon time travelers, I see the closing of distance. I see their ubiquitous presence in all parts of the Earth since the beginning of time, as a local global neural network or a common cosmic connection. Let us now move from the cosmic into the microscopic. Part 10, a tree walks, 梧桐雨，菩提径, is a multiple work project made during a residency in Singapore at a historic hill at the southern tip of the island, facing my hometown, Java. When I first visited the residency house, its walls were covered with Chinese calligraphic works. Many of them were very old. I think there was one dating to the Ming Dynasty. Growing up in Indonesia, I didn't have much contact with Chinese ink art, and I never learned to write with the brush. However, despite my unfamiliarity with the traditional art form, I felt an affinity with the handmade marks and the words that were written for future generations. Around that time, I was reading a journal that my grandfather wrote a few years before he passed on. Interestingly, his journal began with a defense for his writing. He wanted his children to understand him, but felt that his Mandarin was poor, with inaccurate intonations and a tendency to break off in Hokkien dialect. I read Chinese very slowly with a reading voice in my head. Hence, reading my grandfather's handwriting was to experience in equal parts words, sounds, and visuals of his account of his life as a Chinese migrant in Indonesia. Just as I was contemplating the profound relationship between the act of writing and the transmitting of intergenerational memory, I came across an article of how traumas might be passed down across generations through epigenetics, a biochemical process that affects the expression of our genes. I was blown away by the possibility that the memories of my ancestors were written in my biology. From then on, whenever I reread my grandfather's journal, I could almost feel the vibrations of his text within me. My encounter with text, ancestral memory, and genetics gave rise to a strong desire to produce a writing system that expresses my diasporic experience, a system that biologically encodes the discord between my Chinese ethnic origin and Javanese cultural beginnings. My personal diasporic biocultural writing system uses the genetic language as an encoding key to connect two cultural alphabets. The top row are hexagrams of the I Ching. The three letters are the DNA chemical bases, and the bottom row are the Javanese Hanacaraka letters. Hanacaraka is a language linked to Javanese creation myths. I learned it in primary school before I moved to Singapore, copying its letter forms. I never had a chance to use Hanacaraka since I left my hometown. Hence, my sense of familiarity with it sits next to feelings of strangeness and alienation. Similar to the Hanacaraka, the I Ching hexagrams are embedded with metaphysical myths and origin tales. I was seeking a way to synchronize two cultural worlds that have always felt so far apart. The writing system that I devised can be expressed as genetic code or visual ciphers. Let me elaborate. The genetic language is made up of chemical bases A, T, C, or G. Three consecutive bases form a codon. The permutation of four bases with repetition allowed gives us 64 codons. The 64 codons code for 20 amino acids that make up all human proteins. The I Ching has 64 hexagrams. The hexagram is made up of 6 lines, either joined or broken. Conventionally, it is read as a combination of 2 trigrams. However, for my encoding purpose, I approached it as 3 sets of 2 lines and mapped them to the DNA chemical bases. A is 2 broken lines, T, 2 joined lines, and reading from the top, C is joined and broken, and G is broken and joined lines. My double heritage are hence synchronized through the genetic language. The 20 letters of the Hanacaraka are mapped to the 20 amino acids, which are biologically mapped to the 64 codons, which are then mapped to the 64 hexagrams. If we take the Hanacaraka letter C and work it through the encoding key, you will get codon TGT, which corresponds to hexagram 9, or TGC, which corresponds to hexagram 57. For the residency project, I made a number of works that incorporated this writing system, like this site-specific installation that was activated through visitors' interaction. The work is made up of several elements: a cross pole of 3 flags facing south towards my hometown of Java, a square hole oriented to the cardinal points, a mound of soil from the hole placed at the foot of the cross pole, and hybrid DNA in ink. The artwork title is A Tree Talks, A Tree Walks, 梧桐雨菩提径. There are two trees in the title. Wutong is the Chinese parasol tree and also my grandfather's namesake. Puti refers to the Bodhi tree, sharing the root word as my name. The character Yu means to speak or language, and Jing is walk or path. The title speaks of two displaced trees. The three flags graphically encode the English part of the title. It reads from left to right, a tree talks, and repeating from the first, a tree walks. I had referenced the Morse code dits and das by transposing them as short and long color wavelengths, or blue and yellow respectively. Looking at each flag lengthwise, each column encodes a letter, and reading from left to right will give you a word. The third flag can alternately be read as talks or walks. T is da, a yellow strip, and W is dit da da. In comparison, the process for encoding the Chinese part of the title was more embodied. I first had my father read the 6 Chinese words, 梧桐雨菩提径, in his Indonesian Chinese pronunciation, and transliterated his reading into Hanacaraka by stripping away the vowels to retain only the consonants. The title was then encoded into genetic language by using the key that I had developed. With the help of geneticist, Associate Professor Eric Yap of NTU School of Medicine, the encoded title was synthesized into DNA molecules and spliced with 2 other genetic sequences, a part of my Y chromosome and the chloroplast of a Chinese parasol tree. It was a biomolecular writing that told my familial histories of movement across land and seas in the form of a chimeric DNA of person, plant, and poetry. The hybrid DNA was dissolved in ink, which visitors used to mark the soil at the foot of the installation. At the end of the exhibition, the soil was returned to the square hole, changed, and transformed by the memories that touched it. In a conversation with Dr. Eric Yap about the transmission of memories and codes, he shared that conceivably, the transmission potential of the encoded DNA doesn't stop even when it is underground and untouched by human agency. Bacterial sex, the promiscuous parasexual mechanism of gene exchange between bacteria, will see the encoded DNA strands absorbed by the soil microbes and transmitted to the plants and animals that humans will eventually ingest, theoretically. The writing system was also applied, this time in its visual cipher form, to another set of works, Jawa, Nanyang, and Rootword. Due to time, I won't be elaborating on these. As there were a number of questions and ideas that arose from my research in part 10, I branched it off into the trilogy A Tree Plus, 基因, 基义, to develop them further. Part 10 is the first project of the trilogy. The second project is a generative video titled A Tree Rings, A Tree Sings, Shuling, commissioned by the Institutum and co-presented with Gasworks London.
Sorry that I asked, Boedi, are we meant to listen to audio here?
Yes.
We're not getting that through.
Oh. Okay.
Maybe you need to share screen again and make sure to click on share audio too.
Oh, have you been getting the audio signals from the previous few videos?
No.
Oh, okay. Let me try. So stop sharing. Okay. Are we good now?
Yes, we can hear now. Thank you.
The video imagined an audio-visual transmission of memories across 3 generations. The hybrid DNA was used as a music score. Each codon was mapped to a trisonic event, a loose reference to the tritone musical chord. Each chemical base and its position in the codon corresponds to a designated set of sound files. And as the video progresses, an algorithm reads across the hybrid DNA code to sound a composition that will almost never repeat. The sounds originated from the gamelan, an Indonesian metallophone ensemble instrument. I had manipulated the gamelan sounds, quantizing the notes into slow, regular pulses. The visuals in A Tree Rings, A Tree Sings are decade-old photographs that I took in my grandfather's birthplace in China. They were animated through an analog technique that involved my manual focusing, defocusing, and refocusing of an inverted camera lens. This brings me to the third part in the trilogy, A Tree Leaves, A Tree Heaves, Yao Ye. Is an ongoing project that consists of multiple works. Last year, FACT Liverpool presented a 3+ trilogy in Future Ages Will Wonder, curated by Annie Kwan, as part of their Radical Ancestry program, and commissioned the first work, Book of Genealogy. The backstory of the work My Chinese surname is Huang, which I inherited from my father. On my visit to my grandfather's hometown in 2012, I learned that my grandfather had been born with a different surname. He was adopted in his youth by a relative and took on their family name Huang in order to migrate together as a family to Indonesia. At the village temple, I saw inscriptions of names that ran across generations of a clan that I could no longer be part of, and was given a copy of their book of genealogy. In the book, besides a family tree, there were entries of important migration destinations for members of the clan, such as my hometown in Solo City, Indonesia. It led me to wonder what a diasporic book of genealogy might look like. If familial ties are severed due to migration, how do we recover or redraw their traces? The workbook of genealogy is an object that resembles a threefold screen. Made up of thin, double-sided light boxes, it displayed on one side a rephotographed image of a little boat in the sea, taken on the same trip to my grandfather's hometown. Together with the image are the generational names in my grandfather's book of genealogy that are encoded in DNA using the same process as my earlier works. The same names are shown on the other side of the work, this time encoded as circular holes. The position of the holes is based on a spatial encoding key that I have devised. It combines the Chinese telegraph code, which maps Chinese characters to unique 4-digit numbers, and the cellular-shaped Voronoi diagram. The spatial encoding key was also used on one side of the flags that were installed at the foyer of FACT Liverpool. And the other side displayed the original Morse code encoded graphics. I am now planning a new work that imagines the land as a book, and which will involve acts of writing into the soil. Learning from the book of genealogy, I am interested in exploring how language, rather than ethnic or familial ties, could root us deeper to a place. A work that I would like to make is to invite strangers of diverse linguistic backgrounds to speak into a piece of soil that has been rigged with microphones, and to respond to questions along the lines of, where are you from? Where are you going? Are you now home? The answers would then be encoded into DNA and planted in that soil. I am also learning about the medium of microfluidics. A nano tool that is increasingly used in biosciences to combine and separate genetic molecules. I will be working with Dr. Eric Yap on this to perform a biocalligraphy that is planted into soil for future reading. The last project that I would like to share today is the first work in the past series made 10 years ago. In 2012, I received a commission from Singapore's oldest independent art space, the Substation, for a solo exhibition. The year of commission is particularly significant, as I had then just gotten my Singapore citizenship. It was also a time when charged conversations on the influx of foreigners were taking place nationwide, The question of where home and homeland truly was has always been acutely present in my life. After I received my citizenship, and despite having spent most of my formative years here, I still wasn't sure that I could ever belong in Singapore. Ironically, I felt this doubt most intensely at the new citizenship welcome ceremony, at the exact moment when I held my shiny new identity card. No feeling of rootedness, no instantaneous connection to the land. Instead, what I felt then was the void that I have sensed since childhood, an all too familiar feeling of non-belonging. I was disappointed and perplexed. I was expecting relief, a sense of security, not the flux of emotions that surfaced. It was only after many conversations later with my wife, Audrey, that I began to see what went wrong. The American realist painter Chuck Close said that a work is entirely discovered through its process. And as it turned out, I had tried to bypass the journey to reach home and paid a big emotional price for it. Gradually cover it up with marks, drawings, in a sense personalizing it, which is the act of making a home. You personalize a place into being. Part 1, the White City reference, the involuntary tabula rasa that I experienced when I first arrived in Singapore. I spoke only Bahasa Indonesia then, and the city was a cacophony of unintelligible voices. My time space was that of a small town with dirt roads and becaks or trishaws. It was a culture shock on touchdown to ride on long linear roads. The city was like a white void that I couldn't enter, and urban meanings were completely lost to me. That void was restaged at the substation gallery. At the exhibition opening, the walls were lined with paper, empty, waiting to be marked. This time, I didn't want the city to remain as the unknown other. Hence, throughout the exhibition period, I invited visitors, friends, and family to throw graphite-coated balls onto the walls, to fill the void together with me. The throwing movement, the ricocheting ball, and the explosive sound combined was surprisingly cathartic. While dodging balls, I drew the visitors' lines and portraits. And as the visitors to the White City and I jointly made the work, I was surprised at how easy the conversations flowed, and not just small talk. The sharing of time space and the physical communal act of mark making turned out to be conducive towards initiating connections between strangers. The White City was my first live artwork. For the artist, it means yielding control, unpredictable outcomes, and exposing vulnerabilities. In visual art, an object often buffers between the artist and the audience. but life art engenders situations of facing the other. As an introvert, I had to overcome innate resistance to perform life art in my practice. However, I sensed that path could only be meaningful if I involved others, family, friends, or strangers, to jointly unearth, investigate, and address the deep-seated issues surrounding the notion of house, home, and homeland. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this really fascinating presentation. Do you want to? Yeah, okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much. You gave us so much to think about. So the floor is open for questions and comments and responses. Anyone want to jump in? Casey, want to start us off, please?
Thank you very much, Boedi. Thank you. I was thinking here in trying to formulate a question. Then I realized that the word path that you have used has already answered that, in that paths are what we can practically look for. So I was thinking about how to personally for me to make sense of this presentation, which is so rich. So I was thinking of what Dipesh Chakrabarty, who famously said that that we are in the age of the Anthropocene, which basically that's about realizing human beings as a geological force like never before, right? So what is missing in history, I'm paraphrasing this, is that we have been thinking about history in terms of the global history of capital, meaning, the society, culture, and so on. And also history in terms of history of the species, right? Meaning the natural world, biology, and so on. And that because of Anthropocene, we come to a point of integrating them. And now, we realize like never before, what are the questions that we are missing, because of the kind of binary framework that we've been having. Now, in your presentation, what struck me was there's one more element that is really important, which is, like you say, embodied photography, your own biography, your own experience of, being a migrant, trying to make sense of various diasporas, moving between words, histories, families, places, and so on, all coming together and forming paths in the way you have to think about cosmology and the muons and science and everything. It is going to be very difficult for anyone to try to pin this down in terms of disciplines, which will be our framework of knowledge. Is this about history? Is this about art? Is this about sociology and so on? But creating paths is the only way that we could do based on our own experiences and embodiment towards knowledge. So you already answered that, but my one question here, which is also for everybody, if I could, that is art the platform, to be able to discover such paths? Can we come to such paths through, say, physics or, anthropology and so on? Or they are just multiple paths that, that art is a very special one that allows very unconventional ways of asking questions, and more importantly, trying to relate to one's own experiences. And I love the term embodiment in the course of doing this. Thank you.
Boedi, do you want to?
It's a very challenging question, but I'll try my best to answer it. I feel that what art offers to the table here is it's very fluid form, and it's kind of a networking capability of being able to function almost like a root, an ever-growing root that pulls together the different strands of references, disciplines, thoughts into some form of a story. And it doesn't, or at least in my work, my personal story is simply a kind of a connection between so many other kinds of stories, those that are found in physics, those that are found in biochemistry, found in anthropology, history, and so forth. I think another thing that art offers, at least through my own experience of it, is the presence of materials and techniques. Materials they have a way of complicating whatever I had set out to achieve in the beginning of making a work. They have a way of, at times, saying no to the ideas that I had, but also at the same time, they would offer me some of their own ideas. For example, in working on the Black Hut architectural installations, the presence of salt in the concrete wasn't something that I had initially thought about. Salt on concrete, at least in a city like Singapore, is completely frowned upon. Whenever we see any signs of efflorescence or salt blooming, it would be a sign to clean that concrete surface. But the material offered that story to me, and through that, I begin to think about how the tropical climate seems to try to tell me its own concrete story that is different from that was told through the European modernist. Yeah, so things like that happen when you start working with materials. And of course, you mentioned the very heavy term, embodiment. I love this term as well, without really comprehending it. But what I always feel about it was how personal experience and those that I guess are embodied, they also have a way of processing information to create or generate stories that are unique to a person at a specific place and time. And I think if we are to imagine a kind of a global plural society, that site and temporal and personhood, the specificities of each of these are very important in contributing to the table something that can only be shared from that location.
Other questions? I have a question. I've been talking to artists about how they think about their audiences and if and how they change their work when they think about the different audiences that they imagine will look at it in different places. And I wondered whether that's at all in your experience when you're preparing to mount similar installations in different sites.
Absolutely. I think in wanting to interact with a different group of audience, I would deliberately try to adjust the kind of, well, not exactly language, but the touch points or the data points that I present in that work, and as much as I can, I will first research into some of the possible common experiences, common grounds, ideas, stories that would allow me to link up with a particular group of people. I think however, there is also a limit to that because of simply the distance that we have between places. I guess this is where, and this is related to my answer to Ken Chow. On one hand, there is this thing called the international cosmopolitan set of iconographies, terms, language. But on the other hand, to rely too much on them would turn my work into something fairly generic, you know. And I don't think that I will be bringing my best work to any audience if I'm to do that. Hence, despite the challenge, despite the distance, and despite the, I guess, process that has to go on in trying to bridge that distance, I would try as much as possible to retain the kind of localities and specificities that that I have in the work.
Thank you.
But yeah, but absolutely, there will be some form of modulation that is, yeah.
Okay. Even though you're dealing with universal materials like DNA and chromosomes and muons, it's interesting. Coffee.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, they are, you know, they are the common experiences that we share. But what interests me is really how these common experiences translate into your own unique experiences and stories, and how my story can resonate like through these common materials with yours. I think that's to me, that is something that I really like, and I find to be very meaningful in the sharing of artwork.
Thank you. Coffee, please.
So thank you. I've been having problems with my network. I'll just stop talking a bit. Maybe my video will work, show my face, and I'll turn off the video again and then ask my question.
Hello.
So thank you very much. I come from the background of the study of religions. And so that tends to influence my way of conversing and probably thinking. And as I listen to you and listen to this light word embodiment, I was thinking about art, religion, and embodiment. And my mind went to Pete's. Pete has done a lot of work on fetish. Am I still audible? Okay, thank you. So one of the things he brings out clearly is this power of the double in fetish. So the concept of the fetish and its ability to provide a space and capacity for embodiment. In religion, this idea of embodiment was thought to be impossible. Religion didn't provide space for embodiment. Again, with the binary, it was an idea, an ideal. The embodied was more or less the worldly, the probably unaccommodated. It was a place to go away from, to enter into, well, the higher possibilities. So whatever we call it, metaphysical, and so on and so forth. In my experience, cultural history, embodiment was also a point of cultural weakness. And so the missionaries seeing the various artistic forms of expressing knowledge in embodied forms came to be labeled as fetishism, but in the sense of weakness of mind, weakness of thought, and probably the door to, if you like, colonization. I see you reading things backward, bringing the idea, bringing science into embodiment. And I am just fascinated about that idea on the one hand, but I'm also battling with how the embodied self can be liberated, how the embodied self can be relocated into this fantastic artistic space of existence. Yeah, that is my own struggle. I thought maybe you may have a word or an idea about it. Thank you.
Great question, as always.
Yeah, this is, you know, I came to this session fully expecting to be asking questions too, and to learn from all of you. I don't know if I have thought very deeply about embodiment like you, Coffee. I mean, in my art, embodiment is a term that, like I said, I mean, I do not fully comprehend it. It is a very big term for me, and in my art, I use it as a way to reference feelings and emotions, physical sensations and reactions to situations, and also memories that recurs despite the event having happened more than a few decades ago. Hence, from whatever reading that I've done on epigenetics, for example, the presence of these memories and traumas, they are embodied in us, and they are also passed down from our ancestors. So that's really as far as I have thought about the term embodiment. It is very much from the perspective of analyzing my sets of experiences, and it hasn't yet it hasn't crossed beyond that into the realm of metaphysical contemplation and so forth. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Nadia.
Yeah. So thanks, Boedi, for such a fascinating talk. And it really resonated with me. A lot of the questions as well you're asking. And it got me thinking a lot about, well, first of all, you talked about just now, you talked about embodiment as thinking or referencing feelings and emotions, and all these feelings of being displaced or moving, being in motion, that really comes across. These feelings really, really come across in your work. And I was really struck by thinking of language as something that roots us to place, and the use of soil, right, as material, and thinking of the voice that is recorded in that soil, kind of as being bound to this kind of concreteness. And I was just really, I guess for me, I'm constantly trying to understand ideas of what diaspora really is. And I was really interested to know how you define diaspora. So what is it? How do you think of it? What does it mean to you? Is it about a place of origin? Is it about movement? Is it about carrying language? Is it about kind of reflecting or thinking through, when you talked about your grandfather? So is it about connection to one's ancestors, one's heritage? So I'm just really curious to know how you think of it, how you envision it, how you define it, and how the artistic works that you create kind of speak to your understanding or your philosophical quest to understand more, I guess, about that.
Well, at least in my art, and I use that, and I say that because through my art I have been able to crystallize as much as I could, these feelings and emotions that arose from feeling out of place. Diaspora to me is all that you had described. Actually, I mean, it's really this. I mean, first of all, diaspora is a kind of place to me. It is a kind of liminal place that is not really stable, that is somewhat in between several other places, that in that place I could have a kind of unique kind of a distance with those other places. And it is also a place of longing and is a place where there is this intense desire of somehow wanting to connect these very far away places with each other in some way. Yeah. So I understand that this is very much a kind of an imaginary kind of place. And I've been also asking myself, what kind of value, can such a place offer to the people around me, to my community, and to, it feels kind of hard to say this, but to the world. But I think I would yeah, it's I think first yeah, above all, I think to me diaspora is a place. It's kind of a kind of unstable set of coordinates. Yeah, and I guess in my art, I've been trying to see what would be possible from this place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we have time for one more question. Danny, you have a question too, looks like?
Yeah, but Andrea was before me.
No,
You can
okay,
go
so
ahead.
let's
You
go
can go
and then we'll finish up with that. Go ahead. You can both ask your questions.
Go ahead, Andrea, you were first.
Thank you so much. This has all been so thought-provoking and inspiring. I guess related to this point you were just talking about, Boedi, like about diaspora sort of as a place, and as a place that is kind of uncertain and potentially shifting, and maybe not necessarily like a geographic place, but some other kind of conception of place. I guess my question is, what does it mean to you then, after kind of going through these various kind of projects and experiments where you're really thinking about this idea of home? What does it mean to be rooted in that place that is a diaspora? And is that even possible? Like, is diaspora and rootedness, are those two separate concepts that you're exploring, or are those things that in the end can be merged in some way? And I guess what was interesting, maybe the most interesting part of your presentation to me, was when you sort of shifted from thinking through these processes using like these technologies, and especially thinking through sort of these genetic prisms and these these like thinking about these sort of really biophysical processes, to transitioning to a very social practice where you're in a room with a lot of people, you're throwing things at a wall, you're creating something together. And I guess so the second part to my question was, does thinking about kind of identity and belonging through a biological frame facilitate a rootedness within the concept, within a diasporic space? Or is that something we have to leave behind in order to kind of find a sense of home in the diaspora?
Dan, you wanted to ask a question, and then Boedi can answer whatever part he wants to answer.
Yeah, I guess thank you also, Boedi and colleagues for your questions and thoughts. I had trouble grasping a lot of the. You shared a lot of material with us in the processes, and that was for me personally challenging. So I think I need to go through your website peacefully. What I had more like of a clarification question. So if there's no time for that in this session, that's okay. Maybe you can drop me an email, or I can shoot you an email. I think you mentioned that I heard tsunami at one point, and this is maybe just like I'm doing research on tsunamis among other things. And I just wanted to see if you could tell me a little bit more about that, and what I think it was when you were speaking about muons, but I'm not completely sure. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you both Andrea and Daniela for your questions. I'll just give a very quick answer to Daniela regarding the tsunami. So Muography, which is kind of imaging technology similar to how X-ray machines work, except that it uses the free muon particles in the air as a way to create images, is used right now in Japan to monitor tidal waves in the effort of monitoring for tsunami activities. So that was the context of these of the tsunami being mentioned just now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Andrea, your question was multi-layered, so I don't think I could answer it completely. Those are also some of the questions that I grapple with artistically and also personally. Is there a possibility to reconcile rootedness and diaspora? I don't know, but I would like to believe that there is perhaps a form of diasporic rootedness, and that perhaps mean to be able to let go of certain memories, or if not, then the way to go is to be able to also migrate those memories with you. Because when I left Indonesia, I think I have left behind many memories in my hometown that I couldn't or wouldn't carry with me to Singapore. So it has to be either of those. And what was very useful for me was in the imagination of new memories in the place that I am at. And that imagination helps to fill in the voids and to continue from where the truncated memories had left off. Yeah, I think it is not something that I have completely, if ever, could figure out. But over the years, what has become more and more important for me is in thinking about the potential of this diasporic place that I find myself in, and what it offers to my art, and through my art, what can I offer to my audience. I think if you think about a house, and this is expressed very explicitly in the traditional Javanese house, the joglo, is that there are several dimensions to a house. One which is belongs to the private, and that which belongs to the social and public. I think what I had presented just now with part one was a kind of a social dimension that I was interested to engage with through that work. But it shouldn't be seen to contradict with the more kind of interior search for continuities, such as the DNA project. I think that continuities with ancestral memories through the DNA and a kind of connection with the community through a kind of a more socially facing, public facing life artwork. They are simply kind of parts of the house, of the same house. And I guess it is something that I am always very interested to explore as I think about the architecture of a house, sense of belonging of home, and the kind of collective identity offered by the imagination of a homeland.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this has been a wonderful way to start the day for me.
Or end the day for me.
Yeah, I know, and end the day.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really, I think I can speak for everyone that this was really thought-provoking and expansive in ways of thinking about the issues that so many of us care about. So we really appreciate your time and your presence and your ideas, and hopefully you can join us for other conversations. You're very welcome. So see everybody.
Thank you so much for your invitation.
Thank you for all coming, and see you soon. I will send you the recording, Casey and Boedi, and then it will be available to all the GDC members too. So
thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Boedi. Thank
Thank
you,
you for your
everybody.
time.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good day,
Bye-bye.
good day, good night.